Mike Trout wants to win. He's not just out there to collect stats. And the question is, where will he win? And the answer is becoming increasingly apparent that it's not going to be in Anaheim.
Let's bring in Ken Rosenthal. We can ask him too. I know he talked about the Pirates on Fair Territory, and we did talk about the Pirates last year, Ken, and I was not buying what they're selling. This year, are you buying what they're selling? And do you think the Pirates or the Tigers have a better chance of making the playoffs?
I'm buying the Pirates a little bit more than I have in the past because of what we've seen so far from Jared Jones, with Paul Skeens now in the organization as well. But if you go back to something we wrote at the start of spring training, Stephen Nesbitt and I, ultimately, this comes down to ownership. And will ownership at the deadline, if they're in it, be willing to increase payroll and do some things? They have not done that. And that story we wrote included some questions about their development, and they have had some fits and starts there. But it seems like things are on the upswing. And I remember in that story, Ben Sherrington, the general manager, telling me that they believe they have a number of players who will be major leaguers coming out of their farm system, and some who will be impact major leaguers. So it looks good, but remember last year, the Pirates were 20-9. That's how they started, and then they kind of fell apart as the season progressed. So they've played two weaker teams so far, the Marlins, who are decimated by injuries to their starting rotation, the Nationals, who are still rebuilding. I'm not going to get carried away with 5-0, but I'm interested to see what they do. And as for the Pirates versus the Tigers, competitive-wise, I would go with the Tigers. I agree with AJ that they play in a more open division, a division that is more capable of winning for a team that is on the upswing. And they've done some things, too. They added Maeda, they added Flaherty, they have Marcana now, they acquired him in a trade, and they've got younger players who are somewhat more established than some of the Pirates guys. I'm talking about Riley Green and Torkelson. And with Tariq Skubal, they have what the Pirates hope Skeens can be, and that is an ace.
You talked about in your article a while ago in spring training about how the Pirates don't spend in free agency. If this continues, if obviously they're not going to go 81-0, I'm saying if they continue to play well, the Pirates, are they an organization that makes moves at the trade deadline that can, because they never want to give away their prospects that are super coveted and then they go somewhere else and they do super well?
They have not been that team, Eric. There's no question about that. They've been the team that trades young players, and at times it works and at times it doesn't. I'm sorry, they trade veteran players. They trade them for younger players. And we'll see what approach they take, because that is really the question, right? If your team is in contention in an expanded playoff format for a third or second wild card, well, they likely will be. They're not going to collapse, I wouldn't expect, by July. Well, I guess it's possible. But because of the format now, you have greater possibilities. And yes, the question then becomes, are you willing to take on a significant salary? It's something that they really haven't done. They've traded guys. They've traded Garrett Cole, and they've traded even younger players like Glasnow at times and Austin Meadows when they were trying to compete back under Neil Huntington. They did that for Chris Archer. But they traded McCutchen, Cole, I mentioned those guys, and others, right? So we'll see what happens, and we'll see what Bob Nutting is willing to do. They would say, we spent this offseason. We added a number of free agents. Well, the most expensive of those was Aroldis Chapman at $10.5 million for 1 year. Their most expensive external free agent under Bob Nutting, the most expensive guy they've signed from the outside, was Russell Martin years ago, 2 years, $17 million. I'm sorry, you can't simply build a team through your farm and through shrewd trades. At some point, you have to pay, and you have to pay with larger salaries and figure it out that way. It means taking on free agents. Well, if they're not going to do that, let's see them do it at the deadline when you can maybe add a salary or two.
That's mind-blowing to me. Russell Martin for $217. Anyway, Clevinger didn't exactly break the bank with his contract. Is this another... It's a good signing for the White Sox because they get somebody that can eat some innings, which I think they needed. But is this another example of somebody who had to me, even just an average year and should have kept his salary where it was? And maybe overplayed his market, or what have you heard about his signing or lack of ability to sign before this?
He had a pretty good year, I thought. But keep in mind, Eric, Mike Clevinger has had some off-field stuff. If you go back to Cleveland when he didn't follow the protocols and then got traded by the Guardians because he didn't report what he had done, his violations to the team, and flew on the team plane while being exposed to COVID. Ultimately, that led to his trade to San Diego. And then last year, he was investigated for a possible violation of the league's joint domestic violence policy. Ultimately, was found that not to have been disciplined. He was not disciplined for that. And ultimately, the White Sox went ahead and they had signed him already. They did not know of the investigation, and he had a year without incident. But these are things in his past. These are things that might give teams pause. Even though I know he wasn't disciplined, that stuff was all out there in the public. So he perhaps is an example of one of these many veterans who did not get what his market value should have been, but he had some qualifiers on him that some of the other guys we've discussed in recent weeks did not
have. Ken, did you see the news about Estuary Ruiz getting sent down by the Oakland A's? Do you have any thoughts on that? We're going to get into it later, but I know it's only a week into the season. Your thoughts?
I was surprised, and certainly he is a guy that did some exciting things for them last year. Led the American League in stolen bases. I saw David Forst's comment. He's their GM. He wants Ruiz to get on base more often and to maybe work on some things in the minor leagues. I don't know exactly how many players the A's have that are that much more impactful than Ruiz. I know he's not an impact guy per se. He doesn't get on base enough. But, yes, I was surprised by the move.
Let's get to the man who has already won the MVP for the 2024 season, Juan Soto. And something that we probably wouldn't be talking about, his defense. Like, Jackie Bradley Jr. is now the most coveted outfield coach in baseball? Or was there a precipice behind it? Was there kind of a moment where Juan Soto found out he wasn't good at defense and now he wanted to improve it? Or was it just a culmination of him wanting to be a really good player?
I don't know if there was a moment, but certainly he can read the metrics, and they were not good last year in San Diego. And he is entering his free agent year, right? So he knows that he will be judged not just by his offense, which of course is remarkable, but by his defense and base running to a lesser extent as well. And to that end, he did work with Jackie Bradley Jr., who remains a free agent this offseason. They talked about hitting, helping Bradley, and they talked about defense, trying to help Soto. And Soto mentioned to me in an interview I did with him for Fox on Saturday that it was important to him to improve his defense. He knew he needed to get better. Bradley obviously is one of the better defensive outfielders of the recent times, recent decade, and he did give some advice to Soto on basically arm slot with throwing, routes, going back on the ball to the wall, a number of different things, some nuances that maybe had gotten away from Soto. Now, Soto had a shoulder injury in 2021 and kept him out early in the season for a couple of weeks. And Bradley believes that he formed some bad habits during that time and tried to compensate for the injury, and that's what led to some of his issues. Regardless, he's playing at a much higher level so far. We saw the game-saving throw on opening day. We've seen a couple of sliding catches, a couple of catches going back into the corner as well. So he is playing better defensively, and it really bodes well for him going forward as he gets toward free agency, because teams can now say, okay, this guy is not on the path to becoming a DH. He is a legitimate outfielder again. Even if he is an average outfielder to slightly above, that would be more than good enough to warrant the attention that he is certain to get on the free agent market.
Was he not getting this attention in San Diego to his defense, or was it never really brought up when you guys talked about it?
That's a good question, Eric, and I didn't ask him that specifically, but it is something that kind of is lingering out there. Like, what happened to him in San Diego? Now, in 22, when he gets traded, he was a little discombobulated, right? And he had turned down the $440 million over 15 years from the Nationals. That probably was playing into his head. Then he was sent across the country, as pretty much as far away from his native Dominican Republic as you can get sent. And then last year, the Padres just never got untracked. And he had a good offensive season. He ranked 8th in the majors in OPS, but the defense was lacking. The base running was not as attentive as it should have been. And it just seemed like he kind of got away from himself. Now, you might say, well, what's the difference in New York? One difference is he got traded during the offseason, and he had time to get settled in a little bit. And hey, when you get traded a second time, you guys know this, it's a little easier than the first time. And he also knew it was coming and could sense that this was the path the Padres were going to take. So probably all of that plays into this. And yeah, free agency definitely plays into it as well. He knows that he has to get better, and he's taken steps to indeed make those improvements.
Ken, I know you touched on the Angels briefly in fair territory. I was reading your colleague at The Athletic, Sam Blum's article about Trout essentially not getting what he wanted in the offseason and really in spring training, right? He was more vocal than usual, said we'd love to get involved and get a little more aggressive. The Angels bought relievers in the offseason. They were definitely not aggressive. They cut payroll by $40+ million. Can we just say that they're rebuilding? Or for some teams, do they feel like it's a word that hurts marketing the franchise?
We can't say they're rebuilding. If they were rebuilding, they would trade Mike Trout. They would do some other things to maybe get younger and import younger players into their mix, into their whole organization. But that's not where they are. And one of the problems that they have is they're caught in between. They've got Trout on the payroll. They've got Rendon still. They have some other veteran players who would get them pieces in a trade. Taylor Ward is one of them. And yet they're still kind of trying to compete. They still sign a couple of relievers, as you mentioned. Robert Stevenson got good money, 3 years, $33 million. So they're half in, half out. And as we've learned in recent years, that's the worst place to be. If you're all in, great, you're trying to win. If you're not trying to compete and you go the other way, well, it's become a little bit more difficult under this current CBA to tank. And it's not as effective a strategy, if it ever was at all, for all teams, and it wasn't, just for some teams. So where do you go if you're the Angels? In my opinion, one more year of this, actually this should have happened a while ago, but they should explore trading Trout. I don't know what they can do with Rendon, but even a guy like Patrick Sandoval, a quality starter, you can get stuff for these guys. And yeah, it would require a step backwards, a step that Artie Moreno as owner is not willing to publicly make or publicly acknowledge that he's even considering. Well, this is why they are where they are, kind of treading water year after year after year. Doesn't matter who the manager is, doesn't matter who the general manager is. This is a team without a vision.
Ken, some in the chat asking if this is the time. Last question for you. Could Mike Trout get traded at the trade deadline? He had 2 homers yesterday. He's off to a nice start in the first week. You need to see that he's healthy over the course of the first half of the season. But if he looks like this, I mean, he's still one of the best players in the game. Would now be the time if the Angels are 10, 15 games under 500 when we get to July 31st?
That is a question for Artie Moreno. Now, it's a question I can have an opinion on, and my answer would be yes, now is the time. It was the time last offseason, if not the offseason before. Trout has to want it, and I believe he is getting closer to the point where he would be willing to entertain the possibility. But at the same time, this has to start with ownership, and it has to start with a willingness to listen to ideas and think about what it would take to trade Mike Trout, what it would require getting back, all of the things that go into this. And then, yes, Trout has a say in this. He has a full no-trade clause, so he can effectively direct his fate. And he has maintained all along that he wants to win in Anaheim. He wants to be like Derek Jeter. And while people criticize him for that, I sort of admire the loyalty. At the same time, Mike Trout wants to win. He's not just out there to collect stats. And fans can question that, and they can say whatever they want about him. These guys don't get to who they are without being intensely competitive. He wants to win. And the question is, where will he win? And the answer is becoming increasingly apparent that it's not going to be in Anaheim.
Yep, good call. Ken, thank you very much. We'll chat with you later, all right?
Thanks, guys.
Hey, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.